Last year, after the 2012 season, there was some optimism for Tampa Bay Buccaneers fans and for that organization. They had some reasons to be hopeful for 2013. But as the 2013 season drew closer, you started to get a sense that something could end up being a little askew and something could be amiss with this organization in 2013. And I talked about it in my preview for the Buccaneers that I thought that the Josh Freeman, Greg Schiano situation could become a huge distraction for this team and end up crippling this team all year long. And it really did. I mean, the Bucks had a bad year. Yeah, they only have the seventh pick in the 2014 NFL draft, so they weren't the worst team. But especially the first half of the season, what a disorganized clusterfuck this team was. Between the whole Josh Freeman saga and situation, allegations of rigging the vote so he couldn't be team captain, talks about Schiano being the one that leaked that Josh Freeman may have failed drug test or entered into a treatment program or whatever the fuck the case might be, the MRSA outbreak, the lawsuit from Lawrence Tynes. There's just so many bad things and bad distractions. And, when you sit there and you trade a first round pick for Darrelle Revis and you bring him into the fold, you're expecting big time impact. And ultimately, you're expecting to contend for a playoff spot. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers went in the exact opposite direction this year. Ended up finishing 4-12. They started off the year 0-8. Now, they did play a lot better in the second half of the season, but by then, the damage had been done. Schiano just wasn't getting it done. He wasn't cut out for the gig, and they moved on. They fired Schiano. They fired general manager Mark Dominic, and it had to be done. You had to clean house if you're the Glazer family. You needed some stability. You needed a new vision, a new direction, a new style of leadership there in Tampa Bay. When you look at this team in 2013, like I said, they really struggled early on. They started 0-8, and they did play, like I said, a lot better in the second half of the season. Glennon showed some promise, but then, he had his typical rookie mistakes. And, you got to look at it, too. He really only had Vincent Jackson to throw the ball to. He didn't have Doug Martin for a good portion of the season due to injury. And then Mike James starts to show a little bit. And then Mike James gets hurt. And then you have to turn to a Bobby Rainey, who had already been, I believe, cut by Cleveland, of all damn teams. But Rainey played well as well. You got a little bit of an emergence from Tim Wright out of the tight end position, but this was also an offense, I think, at times that really struggled to protect the quarterback, and the offense just wasn't very good. And the defense, for as talented as it was, Schiano seemed to not understand how to properly utilize Darrelle Revis. They still lacked a big-time impact pass rusher on the edges. You had a great year out of Gerald McCoy, no question about it. Levante David definitely should be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. But with some of the talent that they had on defense, there were still games where their defense got owned. And to sit there with a defense with that level of talent, you would expect at least a little bit better than 4-12. So with the house cleaning comes a new vision, a new direction, new leadership for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers organization. And I must say, I applaud the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for their hiring of Lovie Smith to be their next head coach. I think this is the right person, the right fit, at the right time for the right organization. I really, truly do. When especially you look at some of the pieces already in place on the defensive side of the football and how well some of these pieces will fit in Lovie's cover 2, Tampa 2 system and scheme. Even if you want to say over the last few years, Lovie had played a lot more man-man, and he did, but he's still a cover 2, Tampa 2 guy at heart. And you've got guys like a freaking Gerald McCoy, who fit that scheme as a 3 technique tremendously well. Guys like Levante David and Mason Foster fit that scheme incredibly well. Mark Barron fits that scheme incredibly well. Darrelle Revis, I think, if they choose to bring him back, he fits that scheme incredibly well. There is a wealth of talent on that defensive side of the football for Lovie Smith to inherit and work with and make even better. And then you look at the fact that he brings in Jeff Tedford, The old Cal head coach that worked with people like Aaron Rodgers in the past is known as a bit of a quarterback guru. You bring him in to be your play caller on offense, your offensive coordinator. Then you bring in a guy like Leslie Frazier to be your defensive coordinator. When he was a defensive coordinator in Minnesota, they did some very good things on the defensive side of the football. I look at it and I say, yeah, they haven't hired a general manager yet, which maybe suggests that Lovey's going to have a lot of personnel power, or they just haven't made the right decision in terms of who they want to go with. They knew that they wanted to go with Lovey Smith. And how cool is it to see somebody like a Lovey Smith, who was a head coach for 9 seasons in Chicago, when all the talk comes about the Rooney Rule, and a lot of teams, frankly, because they do, just throwing out there a token interview to some type of black or Hispanic candidate for their head coaching position, how cool is it to see that Tampa Bay basically wasted no time and less than a week after firing Greg Schiano and Mark Dominic, they already hired Lovey Smith. Days are changing, and it heartens me to see it, because now you would have seen in the past all the white coaches are retreads and they get instantly hired over more qualified candidates that were both white and black, whatever the case might be. Now you've got somebody like Lovey Smith who's getting hired like that. And he's the right man for the job in the right place at the right time. And it's a really good situation. I have a lot of experiences of dealing with Lovey Smith teams, having watched the Bears during his 9 years at the helm. There are some positives and there are some negatives that he definitely does bring to the table, but he does bring a lot of positives. And he definitely brings a lot of positives for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're going to have, instead of Schiano's overbearing, domineering type of personality and presence and trying to say it's my way or the highway, you have a much cooler, calmer, more collected individual like Lovey Smith, who's perfect for the Bucs at this time because he brings a steadying kind of calm leadership that this organization desperately needed. I really look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2014 and expect to see dramatic improvements out of this team, and I expect to see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense at least be a top 10 defense, if not a top 5 or 7 defense in all of the National Football League, and I really mean that. With guys like McCoy and Claiborne and David and Foster and Barron and Revis. There's talent to work with. There's a lot of talent to work with. And you let Lovey Smith work with it, man, they could do some tremendous things. Now, as an organization, they still have to figure out whether they really want to roll with Mike Glennon because he was Dominic and Schiano's guy, or are they going to go with the 7th overall pick and go in the direction of going after a quarterback? Now, in my opinion, at this point in time, unless they absolutely fall in love with the quarterback, I don't think quarterback is necessarily something they have to address in the first round. I think they could go after somebody like an edge rusher in the likes of an Anthony Barr or a Khalil Mack, somebody that would definitely fit Lovey Smith's cover 2 defensive scheme perfectly, playing that right defensive end. Now, you could sit there and also say that they could, look at talent on the offensive side of the football. Or they could sit there and get aggressive and say Clowney's the guy, and they might want to make an aggressive move to move up in the draft to go get Jadeveon Clowney. Clowney in Lovey Smith's scheme could be potentially very scary. But I really think on the offensive side of the football, they need to do a little bit more to help Mike Glennon. Whether that be drafting somebody like a Sammy Watkins out of Clemson 7th overall, or doing what you really need to do, and that is beef up that offensive line. Like I said before, they struggled a lot this year to protect Mike Glennon and provide him consistent time in the passing game in the pocket. And you look at the Buccaneers for so many years, their offensive line, they have some people. Yeah, they paid Carl Nix a lot of money, but Donald Penn is washed up and past his prime. They need somebody that could be a linchpin on that offensive line for the next 10 to 12 years. So while the temptation for Lovey Smith in that Bucs organization, almost a Bears organization, the Bucs organization will be to focus on the defensive side of the football. You might say, well, you said about the Browns that they brought in an offensive-minded head coach and they took a defensive player. The difference being is that the talent cupboard on the defensive side of the football for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is much more full than it was for the Browns on the offensive side of the football. And that's a fact. So for a Lovey Smith, if they choose to stick by Mike Glennon for another year, and see what he can do, they need to draft somebody on the offensive line, or they need to draft somebody like Sammy Watkins to go on the opposite side of Vincent Jackson, where you can maybe even bring back a Mike Williams in the slot, and you have a very dangerous 1-2-3 combination at wide receiver, and you've given, with a returning, hopefully healthy Doug Martin, and a healthy maybe Mike James, and then a Bobby Rainey. You've got a nice little three-headed monster at running back. There's a lot to like about this Tampa Bay Buccaneers organization heading in 2014. I'll be curious to see what they do in this offseason. It'll be a very important offseason with a lot of big decisions to be made. But the first big decision that was made was the right decision, and that was bringing in Lovey. Now, the only thing that I wonder is if Lovey's going to bring in Rex Grossman to be Mike Glennon's backup, because Lovey loves Rex, sexy Rexy.